We gotta talk about Rogan.
Oh yeah, yo, Rogan.
Oh yeah. He's
Unbelievable,
back.
bro.
And now they're like, we don't need exclusivity anymore because we won.
Mm-hmm.
The war's over.
Well, I
Now
wonder
let's
if
just
they
do a
recoup.
revenue share on ads. And the best way to get revenue share on ads is let them have it everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. That makes sense.
All right, guys, I hope you're ready for a bunch of Andrew Schulz epiphanies because in the latest episode of Flagrant, Andy and the Toy Story boys took a deep dive into Joe Rogan's new Spotify deal. And not only do they not know the basic details, they misinterpreted key aspects of the new deal and it ended up being a love letter to Papa Rogan. The thing that annoys me about this isn't the fact that they're wrong, it's that Schulz didn't even bother to call or message Rogan to get the details, and nobody in his team bothered to do a basic Google search to get the correct answers. This is coming from a podcast that rakes in over $250,000 per month. So I'm going to get straight into it, but just quickly, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and support the channel so you don't miss out on any of my videos. I upload a few times a week, so if you want to stay up to date with what's happening in the podcast world, all you have to do is subscribe and hit the notification bell.
We gotta talk about Rogan.
Oh yeah, yo, Rogan.
Oh yeah. He's
Unbelievable,
back.
bro.
Back on the
Congrats.
tube.
Now he's back on.
He's on Apple
He's
Pods.
everywhere. I think he's gonna be on YouTube too.
soon, yeah.
So, yeah, just
crazy.
the goat.
Yeah.
Just the goat.
I was saying this to you, and this is before the deal even got announced, but this is when I knew Spotify was smart to sign the first deal. My sister-in-law is talking to me about a podcast. She's recommending it. She's like, you should check it out. You would like it. You know where I go to look up the podcast? Didn't even think about it. I went to Spotify. I never would have done that pre-Rogan.
Like to me, I listen to music still on Apple, and then I would listen to pods on Spotify.
Yes.
And now it's shifted my music consumption to so they're making money off of not just podcasts. They're making money.
Yeah.
It like you said, it's not just his podcast. It's everybody who listens to podcasts on Spotify.
Yes, and that's not just, I'm sure the same thing, Alex Cooper's doing the same thing for girls, I'm sure.
They got rid of
but not to that same level, yeah. And they kept Rogan for a
I
reason.
thought they signed her too.
Oh, I thought they let that go.
I think Rogan's number one, Alex Cooper's number two in terms of all the deals they signed panning out.
Yeah.
Rogan distant number one.
Okay, first things first, Schulz is completely wrong because Spotify renewed Call Her Daddy's contract the week before they renewed Rogan's, and the deal was structured in almost the exact same way, except Spotify retains the video rights to Call Her Daddy. Now, if these guys had been paying any attention, they'd know that Spotify did this same deal last year with Trevor Noah, only on a much, much smaller scale, obviously. Basically, Noah is guaranteed $4 million, and as soon as ad revenue reaches that figure, Spotify will then split everything above that $4 million mark 50-50. But for those of you who are new here and have missed my previous breakdown videos of Rogan's Spotify deals, here are the basics. Rogan's old deal was worth between $180 and $220 million over 3.5 years, according to the Wall Street Journal. This was an exclusivity deal, meaning JRE would only be available on Spotify, but you could still listen to it for free. It's important to note that the total value of Rogan's old deal was tied to audience targets. So the more listeners he carried over from YouTube, the more money he was able to earn. And so this arrangement allowed Rogan to manage his own ad reads and sponsorships, which, in my opinion, based on industry standard advertising rates called CPMs, that would have resulted in around $80 to $100 million in additional revenue for Rogan every year. So over the last 3.5 years, based on my basic assumptions, Rogan would have received over $500 million in total revenue from Spotify and from his own ads. That is a lot of money. But this new deal is very different. Now Spotify is taking care of everything. In fact, not only are Spotify now managing all the ad sales, they're also going to distribute JRE across every platform, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and YouTube. This new deal is reportedly worth up to $250 million. Now, that figure includes a minimum guarantee, which is unknown, and a portion of the ad revenue that Spotify will make by advertising across all platforms. So just to clarify, Spotify will now manage and sell ad space on JRE, and Spotify will then pay Rogan a cut of the revenue. Effectively, Rogan has now licensed JRE to Spotify to manage entirely, and they will pay him a cut. And when you put the two deals side by side, even if you adopt more conservative assumptions than I did, in almost every case, Rogan's old deal was worth significantly more than his new deal. The question is, why?
I also figured there was another angle where it's like, you've gotten the market share, but you also know how he can move market share. So you have to pay him to not
leave.
go.
Okay.
Because he could easily just be like, I'm not putting it on Spotify
I'll go
anymore.
exclusive to Apple. I won't put it on Spotify. He don't even have to go exclusive somewhere else.
Everywhere else but
won't
Spotify.
go to you.
That, I'm sure that factors in too.
Yeah.
This guy moves the landscape of entertainment. So you just have to, it is what it is. But I also think they aren't going to do exclusive deals anymore. They're like, we'll still do it.
Well, they
just take a
got the
percentage
market
of
share.
ads.
The whole idea with the deals was to get people to consume podcasts on the Spotify app or the Spotify platform. It's like, you've achieved it. You don't have to spend any more money. And I think that's why they slashed so many people in that department. It's like, it's been done. We've got all the people.
Okay, I've heard this from so many different people now, and it's just plain wrong. Their argument is Spotify has now captured enough of the global podcasting audience, so now they no longer need to pay for exclusive deals. I just don't understand that logic. Spotify is just an app. It's not an ecosystem like Apple or Android or Adobe even, for example. I've seen so many comments from people saying how they can't wait to delete Spotify or that they can't wait to stop using it and go back to YouTube again for JRE. So whilst I agree that Spotify will be able to retain some of the users who followed Rogan and various other podcasters over to Spotify, there's still going to be a bunch of people who delete Spotify altogether and just go back to watching JRE on YouTube. I mean, think about the appeal of YouTube's comment section. And if you're a publicly listed company like Spotify is, there's no way you'd spend over $1 billion on exclusive podcasting deals over the last 3 years, only to open them back up again to distribution across all platforms 3 years later and ruin that initial investment. The bottom line is, if the exclusivity deals had actually worked, Spotify would have done them again. Think about it at a very basic level. Why would Spotify pay anything to a podcaster if they're just going to publish it across all platforms? What's in it for them?
I gotta ask Rogan how he got the bag. I don't know if it's, I mean, it seems like it's bigger than the first bag. Plus, he got the freedom to put it wherever.
From what I've read, Spotify's like, we don't need, I think, again, they're not dumb, dude. I think they threw the bag at Rogan to be exclusive because they knew changing behavior is the single hardest thing to do. Changing behavior of someone instinctively going to Apple Podcasts to Spotify, I need you to be exclusive. I'm going to throw crazy bag at you. And now they're like, we don't need exclusivity anymore because we won. The war is over. Now let's just do a revenue share on ads. And the best way to get revenue share on ads is let them have it everywhere.
So you take the piece of the YouTube. I don't know if that's how it's structured.
So it's worth $250 million to get a percentage of Rogan's ads. Isn't that crazy?
Oh, I didn't know that. That makes sense.
Yeah, they're getting a percentage of the ads.
Oh man, how did Schulz not know one of the most important details of Rogan's new deal? And Akash was only half right. I'll keep saying this until I go blue in the face. If Spotify's exclusive deals were working and had created value for the company, they would just keep doing them. They changed the deals last year, starting with Trevor Noah, because there was something wrong. I mean, just listen to what Spotify's executives are actually saying. This is the reporting from the Financial Times after Spotify had laid off almost 20% of their workforce. The spending spree has weighed on Spotify. Paul Vogel, the company's chief financial officer, put it plainly on a phone call this week. Podcasting was a big drag on our business in 2022, he told me, though he predicted that this drag would subside over time. The article goes on to say, Spotify does not break out its podcasting financial results, but at an investor day, the company said it made close to 200 million euros in podcast revenue in 2021. This means that for all the splashy deals and hundreds of millions of dollars spent on podcasting, it's bringing in only 2% of Spotify's total revenue. And if that's not enough, how about these comments from the founder and CEO reported by Yahoo Finance? Exclusivity wasn't what the podcast hosts wanted. The creator obviously wants to be on many different platforms and wants to have as big of an audience as possible, X said, adding that Spotify's new strategy lets it both grow its ad revenue and keep its talent happy. And so it should be obvious by now that podcasters who went over to Spotify on exclusive agreements lost a whole bunch of their listeners.
That's the other thing to think about when you take a deal like that. Like if you take a deal that could significantly, with Rogan, he was great enough where it didn't reduce his market share. His show probably just grew. And he had to bust his ass to do that.
He never let up.
He did not.
He could have gone 3 a week probably and been,
did totally fine.
Yeah.
But he kept doing banger after banger after banger.
4 a week, 5 a week.
Yeah, I don't even think he gets enough credit for that.
Yeah.
Like he went behind a paywall pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the show grew.
Can you imagine going exclusively to Patreon and then your numbers go up overall?
Yeah.
So
kept the work ethic.
Unreal.
Also, if your pay isn't tied to performance, it kind of just goes down to like almost like character or like personal philosophy of like what you do. If your pay is not tied to performance, then are you someone that's gonna like still show up every day and work as hard as you were before, or are you gonna kind of coast? Yeah, no, it's really cool that he did that. Just like kept the work ethic and kept the character to just be like, yeah, I'm gonna go even harder and have bigger episodes.
Yeah.
Even though it's not necessarily directly going to, performance bonuses or whatever.
Yeah.
So really cool. I don't know if that's part of his deal, but I think it's cool.
Okay, first things first, Spotify did not paywall JRE. It's always been free to listen to on Spotify. Secondly, on what basis is Schulz concluding that Rogan grew his audience when he moved over there? It's true that Spotify don't publish their podcasting numbers. All we can go off is that they say that JRE is the #1 podcast and Call Her Daddy is #2. But there's no way to actually verify that.
With all due respect to the top 2 podcasts who they claim is top 2 is Rogan and
What do you mean they claim?
Well, I mean, I know Rogan's #1, but they claim that Call Her Daddy's #2.
And you don't
What do
believe
you
that?
mean that they claim?
Well,
I think she has a massive market with women.
No, she does. But like, if you look at all podcast stats, Rogan always comes #1. I don't know if she always comes #2. But again, it's their asset, so it's #2 for them. You get what I'm saying?
No.
Tell me what you think about that.
He's saying even if they're not #2, they're going to say she's #2 because
That's
she
#2
has
for
the
them.
exclusive contract.
Yeah,
there's
no,
gonna
that's
be
#2
like,
for them.
if she's 4, let's just move her to 2. Who gives a fuck?
Which makes sense, right? But
And so if Spotify's CEO is saying that podcasters no longer wanted exclusive deals because they're losing listeners, then it's hard to argue that Rogan actually grew his audience after moving over there. I was just reading an article from Insider Intelligence from 2023 that reported some podcasters were saying they lost up to 3/4 of their audience after going exclusive. And when you consider Schulz's comments on the DJ Academics episode, you can start to see how skewed his thinking is when it comes to these types of deals.
if you guys signed, I don't know, what's the number for you guys? 40 million?
300 million.
300? Mm-hmm. Well, he's just not into anything. 300? Maybe 300. Okay, I bet.
Yeah, 9 figures.
Okay, Schulz, if Flagrant is worth $300 million and Rogan just signed a deal valued at up to $250 million, are you saying your podcast with a few 100,000 average viewers is worth more than Rogan's 11 million average listeners? So at the end of the day, this is the bottom line. Podcasting as a whole isn't as profitable as it used to be. During and immediately after the pandemic, podcasting took over as a more reliable source of advertising because you could podcast from anywhere, anytime. You didn't need a network studio or a big operation to publish regular episodes. But now the market is so oversaturated that ad revenue and viewership numbers are falling as the market gets more and more diluted. Having said that, I still think that the massive podcasts like JRE have dealt pretty well with the decline, but when you compare Rogan's previous deal with his new one, there's no way you can argue that it's a bigger and better deal. Spotify are clearly trying to cut their losses and reduce their risk by focusing more on ad revenue sharing instead of exclusive deals to buy listeners. That tells you everything you need to know. They're basically saying to all their podcasters, we'll only pay you out of the money that you're making us from ad sales, which is exactly how YouTube operates. People seem to think that Spotify is competing with Apple Podcasts, but the reality is they're actually competing with YouTube. You see, YouTube figured out the formula a very long time ago. Instead of buying audiences from other platforms through exclusivity deals, they focused on making their platform the most user-friendly for creators. The reason why YouTube dwarfs other platforms when it comes to advertising revenue and regular users is because if you're a creator, you almost cannot afford not to be on YouTube. Just ask Mr. Beast when Elon Musk tried to get him over to X and he said, I can't afford it because X revenue just simply will not cover the costs of making my videos. I mean, that's pretty much what happened with Rogan as well. After 3 years, Spotify said, it's not worth just having you on here, we need to get you back on YouTube and get that ad revenue. So now Spotify is trying to do their version of YouTube's business model by basically just giving creators a share of ad revenue, which is exactly what YouTube's been doing this whole time. Remember what I said earlier? What is Spotify paying for now? Well, like Akash said, they're effectively paying for a piece of YouTube's ad revenue because they haven't been able to match Google's AdSense infrastructure, and they weren't able to attract enough paying subscribers to justify that $200 million price tag that came with JRE. And don't forget, Rogan's new deal is pretty much the same as all their other new deals, just with bigger numbers. So it's not like they made a special new deal for Rogan. They've been structuring deals like this since the beginning of last year, so all Rogan did was jump on the bandwagon and accept Spotify's new business model for podcasting. And don't get me wrong here, guys. I'm not trying to throw shade on Rogan. I don't doubt that he's the biggest podcaster in the world and brings in the biggest numbers. My point is simply that almost everyone commenting on this new deal is viewing it as a massive win, when the reality is it's a pretty sizable pay cut for him, and it doesn't paint a very good picture for podcasting going forward. Either way, he obviously doesn't want to have to manage his own ad reads and sponsors anymore, so it's still a win for Rogan. All he's got to do is churn out the episodes, hand them over to Spotify, and get his bag. It's as simple as that. Anyway, that's my breakdown of Andy and the Toy Story Boys' comments on Rogan's new deal. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you haven't subscribed yet, consider jumping on board so you get all my uploads right there in your feed. That's it from me. I'll catch you in the next one.
Podcasting isn't hard, but it is something that you have to want to do. You know what I mean? Like, if it's not something that you enjoy doing, you will make really horrible podcasts.